In the Lego movie, in the original Lego movie, when the guy wanted to glue all the pieces down so that his son couldn't play with his cities because he didn't want them to be stuffed up. I love this. I love this idea that if you glue the pieces down, then they can never change. They can never evolve. And when you look at a neuroscience point of view, that's not how humans work. Humans need variety. We need change. We need things to change. Otherwise, we become bored with it very, very quickly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. I'm excited to announce that Everything Band has joined forces with several other music education-related podcasts to form the Music Teacher Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to this week's guest, composer Jodie Blackshaw. Hi, Jodie.
Hi, Mark. How you going?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining me all the way from Australia.
You're very, very welcome. I'm in the future over here.
Yeah. You are in the future. Boy, that makes my head hurt a little bit just thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, Australians tend to do that, yeah.
Jodie, can you tell the listeners about yourself and what you're doing right now?
Okay, well, I'm Jodie. I'm 47. I've been associated with bands since I was about 12 years old. And right now I am in my final year of my PhD in composition, studying at the Australian National University with a fabulous Australian composer who is of Indigenous origin. His name is Christopher Sainsbury, and he has a really great grasp on community music and what it's like to work in communities and school-based communities. So he's been an absolute blessing for me as part of my PhD study. So my PhD study is really focused on, it's twofold really. The first part is a real hobby of mine is neuroscience. I really just love learning how the brain works, and in particular, from an educator's point of view, how we actually retain and restore information, and then how we actually retrieve that information as well. So I actually think that it's vital for us as teachers to know about that kind of stuff. And so I've applied a lot of that knowledge and learning and continued learning in that field to how does that influence me as a composer, and how does that influence me in the works that I write for children. So that's one part of my PhD. And the other side of it is I have a portfolio of educational works, and then I have a portfolio of artistic works, so cultivated works. And I'm currently in the thick of writing my major work, which is about a 25-minute piece based on 4 prayers written by an Australian poet and journalist whose name is Michael Leunig. And these prayers are gorgeous, and each one is a prayer for each season. So my summer is called, and the titles of each of the movement come from the prayers, come from a little snippet in each prayer. So the summer is called the blessing of light. The autumn is the bitter and the sweet. Winter is reflection and resonance. And spring is the creation of faith. So it's been an incredibly powerful, emotional and physical journey writing this piece. But I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that double bar line's going to come soon.
Oh, cool. That's a great feeling.
Yeah.
25 minutes is a massive piece of music to write.
It is. It's massive, and it's been really daunting, and it's daunting in a couple of ways. One, because I really set myself this task of trying to extract the newest colours I possibly could from the wind ensemble. I really wanted to push myself into a place I hadn't been before. And so each movement is absolutely doing that for me in every possible way. But also because these prayers written by Lunig, I get that everybody has their own kind of way to find their spiritual guide, whatever you want to call your spiritual guide. And for me, I read Lunig. He's quite the prophet, I believe, and his words really, really touch me. And I guess I didn't really appreciate the enormity of taking what those words say and how they make me feel and then trying to transcribe those into a musical voice. And that has been far more daunting than I thought it was going to be. So I really did bite off more than I could chew, but it's okay.
Well, you know the old saying, how do you eat an elephant, right?
Yeah. No, I don't know that saying.
Oh, one bite at a time.
Well, that's exactly the way I'm going.
Right, exactly. So I want to ask you about that. You mentioned that you are really trying to push new colors, and what's exciting for you about this new piece? What can we look forward to with this?
I guess what I'm really excited about is I'm in the thick of writing The Blessing of Light at the moment. Here's a good example. And so I've taken a lot of my source material from the scientific idea around light itself, so the speed of light and what happens to light when it goes through different mediums. So if it's in a vacuum or if it's going through water or if it goes through different kinds of crystals like diamond, for example, the actual speed of light changes depending on what it's traveling through. So I've actually created a whole bunch of different scales and then melodies based on those scales that have been created based on the speed of light in miles per second. So that's really given me some really, really different material, which means that I'm really thinking very differently in terms of harmony and that kind of thing, because you don't necessarily get your parameters of 1, 4, 5 based on these scales that I've created. So I really wanted it to be my short ride in a fast machine piece. I really wanted the opening to be something that was big and really exciting. And I haven't written anything like this ever before. So I'm really punching it out. But I'm really fascinated, Mark, and this is something that's really important to me, is when I go to something like the Midwest Clinic, after about 2 days, I don't want to hear a band again. I'm exhausted by it. And whilst a live wind band, I actually don't think there's anything on the planet that's more exciting than a wind band playing outstanding repertoire at full flight. I really don't. But gosh, it can get really hard to listen to. It can really pound the eardrums. It can really exhaust you as an audience member. So I've become really fascinated as part of this PhD journey in trying to make sure that the music that I'm writing at that really high level is something that considers the audience, is something that really considers that we need to give them relief, that we need to consider the orchestration style so that it's just not too overwhelming, that we need to appreciate the timbral qualities, the full spectrum of timbral qualities that the ensemble can provide, and make sure that we have them in our compositions so that we can provide longevity for the audience member.
Do you have any specific examples of what you're doing to do that?
Yeah, well, I actually researched a great deal into the writing for winds in smaller chamber groups, particularly of Stravinsky and Strauss, and some of the more orchestral writing that I really, really love, in particular Mendelssohn. I've got a real passion for the way Mendelssohn makes an orchestra sound.
I was just thinking the same thing this summer. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I just think he helps the winds sound really open And he uses, I know he doesn't have as much brass in his orchestrations, but it's just so beautifully scored. So I've carefully gone through a number of different scores and looked at how they are writing for those winds. One of the main things I've actually found is the use of bassoon. And, in Strauss in particular, Strauss will often double either in the same octave or in octaves, oboe and horn, and produce this really beautiful colour that we don't use, and it's a really delicate colour which gives definition to the horn, but it rounds out the oboe, and you get this gorgeous colour. And then when you have the bassoons and you don't have tenor saxophones drowning out the bassoons, sorry to all you tenor saxophone players out there, but they're often in the same register, and the poor old bassoon in the wind band doesn't get the opportunity to really speak.
Not usually.
Yet in a lot of these other chamber works, it's the bassoon that provides this depth of colour and you don't have to have multiple instruments in getting combinations of colours, which we often see in wind band orchestration. It's a colour all by itself. So I wrote this piece last year called Peace Dancer. It was for a Canadian commission, and so Peace Dancer is a Canadian story told by Roy Henry Vickers, an elder of the Squamish Nation in British Columbia in Canada. And so I took this element from this gorgeous story called Peace Dancer, and I really wanted it to be delicate and elegant, and really explored and experimented with many, many different colours that the ensemble can provide, and sort of used that as a precursor to what I was doing with this Lunig work. And I'm extremely proud of that piece, and really I know a lot of people are playing it at the moment, and I've had several band directors write to me as just delighted in the notion that somebody is writing something once again that is, I'm not trying to be a rock star. I'm trying to write something that is elegant and luscious and shows off the colours of the ensemble.
Yeah, that's cool. That Stravinsky, you say that, and of course the octet for winds jumps in everyone's mind, and the colors of those 8 instruments, the bassoon and the trumpets, it's remarkable what he does with that, such a diverse group of wind instruments.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the symphonies for wind instruments and the instrumentation there using, alto flute and 2 oboes and cor anglais and 2 bassoons and contrabassoon. So actually the second movement of my major work, which is called Lunig's Prayer Book, the second movement, The Bitter and the Sweet, is actually written for the same instrumentation as the Stravinsky's symphonies for wind instruments. So, yeah, and it was a real challenge for me to not have saxophones.
So, Jodie, we kind of got off the rails here as far as my plan, which is okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, it's okay. Fascinating conversation. I don't mind at all. But before we go on, I need to ask you about your background. And so how did you get started into music? And what's your instrument?
Oh, okay. So my instrument is clarinet. But my original instrument, my very first introduction to playing a musical instrument, I lived in a tiny little country town called Yenda in New South Wales, had about 500 people in it. And I learned the dual keyboard with pedals electronic organ.
Oh, wow.
Whatever it was called.
They were really popular when you and I were kids.
Yeah, really, really popular.
Like that 70s, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very 70s music.
Yeah, yeah.
And you could put your vibrato on and your reverb on, and but interestingly, in writing my exegesis for my PhD, I really learned what a powerful impact that instrument has had on me as a composer. So, and there's something else I wanted to mention, that my first teacher, her name was Vicky Foster. And I had her for many years, about 6 years of my life. And Vicky, I loved Vicky. She was effervescent and full of life, and she took us on picnics, and, we go on hay rides, and we'd have pizza nights, and a whole bunch of us formed a choir and we sang at her wedding. It was that kind of music teacher relationship. And she really, I loved playing the organ because I loved Vicky. And then my next music teacher, whose name was Lois Johnson, who I had in my high school years. Look, I loved Lois as well, but Lois was a very different kind of musician. She actually traveled through Europe performing on this organ, and she had this custom-built organ in her garage that was this phenomenal machine, with 2 octaves of pedals and 4 keyboards, and it was just crazy. And what Lois taught me was she really taught me to love the music. She introduced me to Gershwin, and she introduced me to a whole bunch. I used to play a whole bunch of salsa, and I played Stevie Wonder. She introduced me to Stevie Wonder, just all sorts of different kinds of music, which, sounds pretty daggy on a keyboard, but it also taught me chord extensions. She taught me a lot of intricacies in terms of harmony and how to play, not only how to play and read all these chord extensions, but also how to utilize them, how to voice them, and also then how to blend different timbral colours to create the kind of sound that I was, trying to express. It's had a massive impact on me as a composer, being an organist, which is essentially what I was up until about the age of 17. So, and I love the idea that one of my teachers, I loved music because of her, and then the other one taught me to just love the music. And so, that's a big part of my background. But as for clarinet, I played in a local band, youth band, that a man by the name of Mr. Bell, Gary Bell, put together. And he was a maths teacher, and he had a bit of music knowledge. He was a brilliant administrator and, got the funding to enable the bands to happen. And it really was thanks to him that I was able to travel to meet clarinet teachers to get better at my instrument, because there were no clarinet teachers in town.
How did this work out? Because the band culture in Australia is different. You don't have school bands the way we do in America, correct?
Some schools do, but really no. I think it's fair. I don't want to overly generalise here, but because some states are different. But on the whole, we have 2 ways of teaching music, and one is through ensembles, and the other is through what you guys call general music, classroom music. But our classroom music is very thorough, and the other main difference also is that a lot of our students are able to get private lessons from the moment they start playing their instrument. So they're learning privately, they're learning about music from a general music perspective, and they're playing in an ensemble. So, it's a very well-rounded music education.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I see. And so now are ensembles sort of volunteer, or they're just community-based?
A lot of them are volunteer. A lot of the kids at schools volunteer to be in the band. We call it extracurricular. So band is something, often in the state of New South Wales, for example, which is the state I grew up, so the bands aren't they're not sort of integrated into the school so much, but there might be a parent committee who runs the school band, and it runs like the soccer team or the cricket team or something like that. It's something that's outside of the school. Whereas in the state of Victoria or in the state of Queensland, the bands are a lot more integrated into the education system, and in some instances people actually do band for music like you have in the States, but it varies school to school.
So, Jodie, how did you, when did you decide that you wanted to be a musician as your career?
That's easy. That's actually an easy question for me to answer. It was in the 9th grade. I was about 14 and a half years old. So I was at a Riverina music camp, a music camp held in that region. I was fortunate enough to go to a public school that actually offer these kind of opportunities. And this new music teacher by the name of Mike Keogh had moved into the Riverina, and he just had this energy and enthusiasm, and there was a kid there, I remember, his name was Shane Brown, and he was from, if you're looking at that map, he was from an even smaller remote town called Hillston, and Shane was a prodigy. He was an absolute freak of nature, and it was the first time I'd ever seen somebody take music so far as a young person, somebody really become someone who was so incredibly gifted. And there was something about what happened at that music camp, something really clicked for me, and I thought, I really want to do this. This is what I really want to do. And I remember when I came home from that music camp, and I'd just been playing my clarinet for about 8 hours a day, 7 days in a week. And then I come home, and that evening I go out into our little side room area, and I pull out my clarinet and I start playing. And my father came out and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm practicing." He said, "Why? You've just been playing it for the whole week. What are you doing?" And I remember saying, I think I want to be a musician. And from that day on, my mum and dad did whatever they could to, scrape their pennies together to send me to whatever opportunity they could find and that I could find to help me try and make music my career. They were incredible parents, really fantastic.
Jodie, one of the things that you and I talked about before we started the episode was female composers and where we're at in society right now in the band world with female composers. And we're making lots of progress, and you're quite an advocate for other women who are writing music. What can we do to help encourage more girls to write music?
For me, I saw a quote somewhere. I wish I could remember the name of the composer, and I'm going to paraphrase her. And she said, so often what we do is a female composer has to have a body of music that already proves itself, that has already been established. And we're pretty unforgiving when we listen to female composers. We expect them to reach a particular level of professionalism before we'll play their music. Whereas, so we expect them to be polished. We don't give them an opportunity when we see potential. Whereas I really think that for a lot of male composers, people see potential in them and give them lots and lots of opportunities, play their works, record their works, get their works up to a point, where the work really reveals itself. It's not just a one-time playthrough. And they're nurtured, So I really think what we need to do is see female composers in terms of potential, as well as, the good work that various composers are already doing, but look at them for potential and nurture them and enable them to grow.
That's a really interesting perspective. I hadn't ever really thought about it in that way. We often talk about access or having role models, but as far as that nurturing potential, and I can see that having, I have a doctorate in composition. I've taught at the college level. I've seen all sorts of things go by.
Yeah, it's a perspective that has really become part of me now, because I know that I've had some pieces out there, and it's taken 5 years for me to really get the opportunity to work with an ensemble of a high quality who can really make the piece speak. A good example is a work that I wrote. It was commissioned for a National Australian Band Conference, and it's called Twist. And I really thought for a very long time that I needed to do massive rewrites on that piece. It was already published, and I knew it was going to be difficult to do rewrites, but I really thought that a number of sections in the work really just didn't achieve what I wanted them to achieve. And then at the end of last year, almost exactly at this time last year, John Lynch did Twist with the Sydney Conservatorium of Music Wind Symphony. And I was in tears. The piece worked. The piece actually worked. And here I was 6 years after it had first been premiered, hearing the piece for the first time. And then only a few months after that, St. Olaf, the fantastic wind symphony directed by Timothy Marr from St. Olaf, came to Australia on a tour, and they brought Twist with them. And they were influenced by the John Lynch recording, and then their performance there, I don't know if you know that group, but they are just the most enthusiastic, gorgeous bunch of musicians. I absolutely adore them, who just poured themselves into this work. And for me, I just thought, and here we are. Finally, now people are going to hear what this piece really sounds like, and they know what to expect from it, and so they will demand that from their ensemble. But up until that point, I don't think the work really and truly had been heard. I'd heard very good performances of it, but there was it was still missing something for me all the time. And I think, you get a master like John Lynch in front of your score, and suddenly your music speaks a whole lot differently. And that's what female composers need. They need experiences with really great conductors who can draw everything out of their notes, and then they can learn what it is that they need to change or adjust, or what really works for them.
So I want to ask then, when did you start composing?
Oh gosh, I go back to my boom chicka boom organ days. I was always writing stuff. I was always, it's a fantastic thing because you can put headphones on and you can just go into your own world, and then you just disappear. So I was always creating things. And then in my year 11 and 12, our final 2 years of high school, I wrote my very first piece for band, and I wrote it for the local community youth band I played in. And I didn't know much about any other instruments, so I hung out with all my buddies who played different instruments and said, what's the highest note you can play? What's the lowest note you can play? What does it sound like? Did all of that kind of grassroots stuff. And I wrote this piece for band called I Had to Do It as a 17-year-old. And, it was this poppy-flavoured piece. But I really enjoyed the process and really got a lot out of the process. And I was really lucky that we had a new classroom music teacher move into Griffith, who was a fresh graduate from university. His name was Noel Annett. And he had quite a penchant for composition as well. And he sort of really started to show me a little bit of the craft behind composing. And I decided that I actually wanted to go to university and study composition, and I didn't want to study performance. I got into the Canberra School of Music, which at the time I think could be arguably stated it was the top music school in Australia at the time. And I got in to study with Larry Sitsky, an amazing Australian composer. And I am very grateful. I didn't go and study band music because I think Larry's written one piece for band, but I studied composing, the art of composing with Larry. And I've been a composer ever since.
So Jodie, can you tell me a little bit more about your music? I know we talked about Peace Dancer and we talked about Twist, some of your more difficult grade 4 and 5 music, but how about music for younger students?
Yeah, I'm a bit of an out-of-the-box composer when it comes to writing for younger students. So if you look historically at the evolution of the band teacher, what happened at the end of World War II is that America had a whole bunch of musicians who had been serving, and they needed to find employment for them. And a lot of them became band teachers. And even prior to World War II, a lot of the band teachers actually weren't qualified music educators or trained music educators. So a lot of the repertoire and a lot of the teaching materials that surrounds works for children is actually more director-focused rather than being child-focused. It was something that made it a little bit easier for the band director to be able to teach from their musical knowledge perspective to the students rather than thinking about how does a child actually learn. And I know that historically it's been documented, that the method book was only ever meant to be a really short interim set of materials before they actually found what was going to be the best way to teach band. And we're still here with method books. So my music really is child first focused. So in my music, I nearly always have an opportunity for children to recreate something. I want them to be invested in the music that they're playing. And when they're just regurgitating the notes that are on the page, they get bored with it pretty quickly. When you think about the 21st century child and you think about how much they're able to educate themselves from the internet, it's just scary what my daughter knows at the age of 12. It's certainly a whole bunch more than what I knew. They want the opportunity to bring that music into their world and do something with it. They're more hands-on. They really want to see the music as being a project that they're part of rather than something that they just play at the end. And that's been my experience again and again and again with students. So, Whirlwind was a classic example of me working with a young school band in a rural centre in Victoria that was an eclectic mix of instruments and an eclectic mix of musical backgrounds where some kids could read music, some kids couldn't. So I used the oral teaching traditions of Schulwerk to really introduce different melodic lines and melodies, and from there we built our own kind of piece. That was based on another melody, but I then created Whirlwind based on that model because it was so successful. If you look at Belah Sun Woman, published by GIA Music, Belah Sun Woman is a resource. Yes, it's 5 pieces of music, but it's a resource. And within that resource, you have a whole bunch of assessment options, a whole bunch of different off-the-podium teaching options. And that means that you are doing lessons where the kids are developing all sorts of concepts around ensemble, but it doesn't have to do with them playing an instrument. It's got to do with all that other stuff about having a unified ensemble pulse, about seeing that everybody is on the same playing field, even their director, and that you are all there to make music. It's about listening to music. It's about feeling music in your body and really understanding how your body moves with different contours of different styles of music, so that you can bring all of that knowledge back to your instrument when you're trying to play, so that when your band director says, I want you to play this smooth, then the students in your band, they've had an opportunity of moving to music and being smooth with their body. They've got something to attach to. They've got something to connect to outside of that band room. And this is what neurology tells us. This is what all the studies into neuroscience tells us about how we build our body of information. We cross all of our neural pathways and we build stronger pathways, and they're not dirt roads in your brain anymore, they're highways. And we need music to attach itself outside the band room as well as inside the band room, so it becomes part of the whole child. And so often I'm so frustrated by so much music that is written for children, because it really just is, here it is, I'm going to tell you how it sounds and you're going to play it the way that I say. And children are bored with that. They don't want to learn like that anymore. And so that's why I write the music that I write. And a lot of people are freaked out by it. I get that. But hey, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And that means there's no educational growth in your program.
I'm looking at the piece right now. So this idea of movement and connecting it to emotion, that sounds an awful lot like the Rudolf Laban movement stuff.
Yes, you've got the Laban stuff and how that's all been translated into conducting technique. Mm-hmm. But, I've seen conductors in front of young students doing all of this elaborate, fabulous conducting technique, and it means nothing to the children. We need to teach those gestures, and Belah Sun Woman does exactly that. If you actually look in every one of those movements, there's a whole sort of structured educational unit that goes with each movement, and each movement builds on the body of information they've learned in the first movement. And guess what? I've even put in there introducing different kinds of conducting gestures. You actually can use your baton until the third movement. Well, ideally, but, ideally you don't pick up a baton until the third movement.
Yeah, no, it looks really cool.
Yeah, it was 5 years. It took me 5 years to conceive and pull together a whole bunch of different, my teaching experience, because I taught band for 12 years and I taught in the classroom for 8 years, and I'm an Schulwerk master teacher, and, all of these different things to try and bring it in to piece it all together to create what I call a project piece. I think at early stages, a lot of people criticize the music written for bands, but essentially the music is still functional. It's educational. It has a function behind it. And if we forget that, then we're forgetting the child.
Yeah, you hear this expressed in a lot of different ways. The people I've talked to over the years, it's about making, adult-centered decisions, or that sort of idea. We put ourselves in front of the kid.
Yeah, from my perspective, when I write for children, it is child first. So a huge thing that I just created for my PhD, which has taken me decades to realize this, Mark, and I'm so excited. It's a piece called 13 Moons, and there's 4 movements, and they're north, south, east, west compasses. Again, it's actually inspired by a Native American text called 13 Moons on Turtle's Back, and it's the different phases of the moon. But these pieces, you're not going to pick up that resource and see a score. You're going to pick up that resource and see musical components. But what you get to do with your students is compose with structure, timbre. You get to explore different kinds of orchestrations, different kind of chord voicings. You can explore the addition of expressive techniques and when they're useful and when they're not. And you compose with all of those other concepts, but you don't compose with pitch. So you're not composing melody and harmony. I'm giving you that. So many people think that composition starts with melody and harmony. And I go, no, for me, it starts with colour and it starts with texture and it starts with structure. If you can get those 3 things down and know what kind of influence they make on the music and how you're trying to express yourself, then you can grab your own melodic material and you can then add that to that knowledge. So I think when you're composing with your ensemble, you can introduce composition to your groups by having them compose with all of those other elements. And I'm really, really excited about this resource, and I'm really excited about creating more composing pieces, as I call them, and having people embrace them and make them part of their program. You get a performance piece at the end of it. Absolutely. You've still got your performance piece, but you've got 100% investment from your students because they're making decisions about what happens next.
Mm-hmm. And so what age level is that appropriate for? What skill level is that appropriate for? So 13 Moons North is grade 1. 13 Moons East is about a grade 2, and then grade 3 for 13 Moons South, and then 13 Moons West is grade 4. But really, you could have a university group compose with 13 Moons North with the first one. I guess what I'm more asking is what kind of, I'm thinking about my own groups. What sort of baseline musical skills do the groups need to have to do the first one?
I think it's great to start this kind of stuff when you're in your second year of playing, because let's be honest, your first year of playing is all about building the ensemble. So if you look at Belah Sun Woman, the first movement is everyone's banging chairs with drumsticks. No one's got an instrument in their hand. And all of the learning that goes along with that is building ensemble, building pulse. All the conductor is doing is using their face to gesture to their students, using breath and that kind of thing to come in. So you're establishing a lot of those kind of ensemble skills and communication skills between the conductor and the ensemble. They just don't have the distraction of print music in front of them or stands in front of them or anything like that. They can they can just start with just a pair of drumsticks and a chair, and I think a lot of that kind of stuff can happen in the first year of playing at the same time whilst they're still just trying to learn where to put what finger. And I know we're a very visual-focused music entity, the band world. We don't like using ears a lot. We like using eyes. We have to read it. So, we put a lot of pressure on kids in that first year. So I love the idea of bringing in the creative visual component, which is what the 13 Moons resource is, but you could start your second year with that kind of thing. And it's my dream that, once a year you would have a composing project as part of your annual, teaching routine.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like the way you're thinking outside of the sort of standard wind band box.
Someone has to.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
If we're going to grow, if it's going to grow, then we have to break the mold at some point.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconnor.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconnor@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. And so, Jodie, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
So I think, having taken my own bands to competitions and seeing that it does create a goal. There is a goal that is there. And what I used to love about the competitions I would enter into is that for the most part they would occur on weekends, so parents could come. So I adjudicated a junior school band festival in Western Australia last year, in Perth, Western Australia. And whilst it was, if you like, they called it a bit more of a festival than a competition, you know, the band still had to prepare certain works, they still had to turn up, play on stage and do that kind of thing. But it was one of those festivals where you workshop the groups on stage after they played. And what I loved about what Western Australia did was that a band played, they got workshopped by their adjudicator, and then they came and sat in the audience and they heard the next band play. So what I really love about healthy competition is when the band director prepares the kids to say, we are doing this for us, we're preparing the music to play the best that we can play, we don't care about what the other person thinks. We're not going there to win, we're going there to play and play well. You know, I love it when people pick really fantastic, meaty repertoire that's really going to challenge their students and take them on a journey. I think all of that is wonderful when they embrace it as, you know, one of their real stellar performing moments of the year, and that their parents can be there to enjoy and take part in that performance. When it really becomes unhealthy is when people really whip their students, when they make it a rote teaching exercise, and when they make the students play the repertoire again and again and again and again for about 9 months of the year, when the only focus of the whole year is playing one set of repertoire for the sake of gaining whatever, you know, medal at the end of it, that's when I think we've really lost focus about what are we doing this for? Who are we doing this for?
All right, Jodie. So musicians and music teachers are very busy, and the demands of the profession are high. And so how do you achieve a work-life balance?
Oh, yeah, it's hard. I think it's really important to keep feeding yourself. I think one way to make sure that you have longevity in the job is to keep inspiring yourself, is to make sure you look after yourself. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to feed yourself with more music. You might need to feed yourself with a gorgeous art gallery, or it might be running, you know, it might be something else. But I think it's really important. Sometimes musicians, all they do is music, and all their friends are musicians, and all their hobbies, everything around them has something to do with music. And I think it's really healthy to have some balance there and have something else in your life that feeds you and enables you to keep giving. I think it's also really great to turn off your phone, you know, and make sure you're not working 24/7, really completely have that time in your life where you shut it down and I've finished work today. It's really hard to do that with lots of parents and, you know, lots of things going on, but I think it's really important to shut it down. And I know this is a kind of a basic, but eat, you know, like so many music teachers, and I was one of them, you could go the whole day, and those days are sometimes 14 hours long, and you haven't had anything to eat. You know, You need fuel. Have quality fuel with you and look after yourselves with quality food that isn't going to just, cause your body to self-destruct.
What are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
Okay, I think there is the great divide in music education from my perspective. And there is the rise of socialism in education, where we have the difference between the objectivist educator and the constructivist educator. And the objectivist is the one who stands out the front and believes that all of their students can't learn anything without them, that they need to be told in order to learn. And the constructivist really believes that everybody has knowledge, and when we share that knowledge, we build greater knowledge amongst each other. And there seems to be a great divide in the way we teach music between the objectivists and the constructivists. And that's caused quite a lot of issues from the top down in recent years. And I'm very concerned for the wind band directing world that they are staying staunchly in their objectivist model. Now, I understand that we honour our mentors, and I understand that it's honourable to teach the way that you were taught. That you have there's this lineage that's an embedded part of the wind band culture. But for me, it's strangling the life out of the opportunity to grow from an educational perspective, to grow from a pedagogical perspective. I know a lot of wind band directors have just turned off now, Mark, because I've used the P word. I've used pedagogy. But we really need to think about the way our teaching approach, because for a lot of people, our teaching approach isn't working anymore. You are no longer the expert out the front. Google's the expert. The internet's become the expert. The kids are the expert. They can learn stuff without you. And I think one of the greatest issues we have in band education is that we need to get off the podium. We need to think differently. And you asked that question about competitions before. I know that that's really hard for some band directors, because if they don't get a platinum rating, they lose their job. So it's not just about, people have to think differently in the way they teach their approach. We need to think differently at the state level and at the federal level, because we need to make a fundamental cultural change to what the role of band education is in schools. Is it just functional, or are we there to actually teach music? And if we are there to teach music, then goodness, let us teach music. Stop making us do all these other things and prepare this march for this and this processional material for this and this and this. Maths teachers aren't asked to have their students perform how they realise some quadratic equation in public every other week. So why do band teachers have to do that as well? Their music educational process is constantly interrupted. And I think, and on the other side of that, band directors are just absolutely hammered and criticised in the academic world for not offering a diverse enough range of music, or not teaching enough of the musical fundamentals, or not teaching musical independence. I've seen all that criticism. I've read all that criticism. I've talked to those people who criticise what band directors do, but they don't understand all of the other pressures that are on them. So the greatest, difficulty, I think, for band directors is, standing up for themselves and saying, okay, if you want us to teach music, we'll teach music. But you need to understand that we can't perform every other week at assembly, and that we can't do all of these other things. We're going to be here and we're going to teach music. And music is valuable because, and we all know why music is valuable. And we all know that the arts are being slammed. And when you've got a right-wing government, what's the first thing to go out the window in education? It's the arts, because you can't assess it properly. You can't, how can you assess someone's creativity? They like to see numerical data, and music isn't based on numerical data. It's based on emotional data. So you've got all of that kind of issue with music education, and I get that. But bands are being hammered, and they're being hammered worldwide because there is a faction that really believe that what band directors do isn't valid to music education. And it's absolute rubbish.
I think you've equal part offended and excited my listeners. I think. Do you know what I mean? I think
that pretty much sums me up.
So, Jodie, I asked this question, and let's say that you're finishing school. You know, in America, it would be high school. But what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self who is going off to university or into a career?
What would I say? I would say go and do an Orchestra course as soon as possible. Don't wait 13, 14 years to discover Orchestra. Go and study. Go and find it now, because it is a powerful and remarkable and fun and joyous way to teach music, and you're not going to find anything that matches it. So that would be one of the main things that I would say to myself. If I really wanted to go out and do music, then that would be, because I didn't hear of Orchestra until I was 30. And I had all of those years of teaching not knowing about it.
Jodie, if you could plan it out, and not in a morbid sense, but what would be the last work or the final work that you'd want to conduct? And it doesn't have to be for band, but this is a band podcast, so.
I don't really conduct anymore.
How about just engage with in whatever way that might be?
I honestly, when I think about it now, let's just go with my gut, my first reaction, it would be doing a composing piece like the 13 Moons work that I've just created. It would actually be working with a bunch of students and being able to take them through that process, because that for me is the most exciting and exhilarating and fulfilling experience I can have in life.
Jodie, knowing that this is going to live on the internet for months, possibly years, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote, long-term or short-term?
Yes, in December, Midwest 2018, on Friday, December the 21st at 8:30 in the morning, I'm presenting a clinic called Directors for Diversity. And I am greatly thrilled to be standing alongside the likes of John Lynch, Mary Schneider, Jerry Junkin and Kevin Sedetol, who have all created their own concert program that contains works by women and by men. And together we are selling the message of just how wonderful it is to have colourful programming and, how to go about doing that, and also some of the hurdles you might face, and we're going to offer some suggestions as to how you can overcome some of those hurdles. But we're all very passionate about this topic, and I'm very proud to be leading that clinic in December. So, and please, be brave. And if you do nothing else at the end of this podcast, go and listen to the last movement of Belah Sun Woman. So just go and listen to the 5th movement. You can find it on my website, jodieblackshaw.com. Just go and listen to the last movement of Belah Sun Woman. It's grade 2. And write to me and tell me if you think you've ever heard a grade 2 work like it.
I will certainly link it in the show notes so that people can find it. Jodie, how can people get in touch with you?
I'm on Facebook, Jodie Blackshaw Composer. You can hook up with me there. There's on my website, jodieblackshaw.com, there's a tab and it just says coffee with a question mark, because I'm a bit of a coffee addict. So you can just hit on that and you can write to me. I'm also doing these great things at the moment called virtual composer residencies. And because of the time difference between Australia and the US, what band directors are doing is that they're doing one of my works and they record themselves during the process of learning the work. So it's not polished. They may have only had it for a couple of weeks, and then they record a performance of it and they send me that and a few questions, and then I listen to them performing it and I create a little video and I include all these kind of teaching ideas and different things, and I send the video back. And what that means is that schools can put that on their network, and they can watch it in rehearsal, but then students have been taking it home and sharing it with their parents and, getting their parents and families to know about one of the pieces they're learning. And so then we do a couple of video exchanges, and then depending on the time of the concert, I either give them a pre-recorded intro or I Skype in live and introduce the piece. And I'm really excited about these virtual composer residencies because they're much more affordable than actually having me come in person, obviously. But also they're just a really fun way for students to interact with me without me having to get up at 3:00 in the morning.
So Jodie, I want to thank you for this interview, and I want to say something about you challenge me and my beliefs, and that's a good thing because that means you made me think, and I want to thank you for that.
You're very welcome.